The rain hammered against the bistro windows like bullets, blurring the Chicago skyline into smears of neon and shadow. I sat alone at a corner table, gripping my water glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. 3 months. 3 months since I'd left Marcus, and still his presence haunted me like a ghost that refused to cross over. My name is Alara Vance, and I'm 26 years old. On paper, I'm an occupational therapist who helps children recover motor skills after accidents. In reality, I'm a woman who made one terrible mistake in judgment that's been unraveling my life thread by thread ever since. Marcus Holloway seemed charming when we first met at a hospital fundraiser. Confident, successful, the kind of man who knew what he wanted and went after it. I should have recognized the warning signs earlier. The way he'd show up unannounced at my apartment. How he needed to know where I was every hour of every day. The subtle comments about my clothing, my friends, my family. By the time I understood what was happening, I was already drowning in his obsession. Leaving him had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. I'd changed my phone number, moved to a new apartment across town, varied my daily routines. For a while I thought I'd escaped. Then the texts started coming from unknown numbers. Photos of me leaving work, walking to my car, having coffee with my sister. Each message a reminder that Marcus was watching, waiting, playing some sick game only he understood. Tonight was supposed to be different. My best friend Sienna had convinced me to stop hiding, to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. "You can't let him win," she'd said. "You can't let fear be your prison warden." So here I was, forcing myself to have dinner in public, trying to pretend my hands weren't shaking every time the door opened. The bistro was a beautiful space, all exposed brick and vintage Edison bulbs casting warm amber light across weathered wood tables. Jazz played softly in the background, saxophone notes curling through conversations like smoke. Under different circumstances, I would have loved this place. Now it felt like a stage set for my next disaster. I'd ordered the special, some kind of herb-crusted salmon I had no appetite for. When I felt it, that prickling sensation at the back of my neck that meant someone was watching, I looked up, and there he was. Marcus stood just inside the entrance, water dripping from his expensive coat, his eyes locked on me with an intensity that made my stomach clench. He looked exactly as I remembered, tall, well-built, with the kind of conventionally handsome features that belonged on a cologne advertisement. But now all I could see was the darkness behind those blue eyes, the obsession that had transformed love into something twisted and suffocating. He started walking toward my table. My fight-or-flight response kicked in, adrenaline flooding my system. I needed to leave. Now. But my legs felt like they'd been welded to the chair. Years of being an occupational therapist had taught me about trauma responses, about how the body could freeze when the mind perceived mortal danger. Knowing the science didn't make me any less paralyzed. Alara. His voice was exactly as I remembered. Smooth. Controlled, with that underlying current of something dangerous. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, Marcus. Please leave." I was proud of how steady my voice sounded, even as terror clawed at my insides. "You've been avoiding my messages." He pulled out the chair across from me uninvited, sitting down like he had every right to be there. "That's rude, baby. We were together for 2 years. You owe me a conversation at least." "I owe you nothing." My hands were trembling now, and I hid them in my lap. "We're done. I've made that clear." His expression shifted, that familiar flash of anger breaking through his carefully maintained facade. "You don't get to just walk away from me, from us. I've invested too much time, too much of myself into this relationship. You're being selfish and ungrateful." This was the Marcus I'd come to fear, the one who believed I was his possession, something he'd purchased with time and attention, and now owned outright. I opened my mouth to respond when another voice cut through the tension. "The lady asked you to leave." The voice came from the table adjacent to mine. I'd noticed the man sitting there earlier, alone like me, with an untouched glass of whiskey and a phone he'd been staring at with an expression of profound weariness. Now he'd set the phone down and was looking directly at Marcus. He was maybe 35, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he'd forgotten to get it cut rather than deliberately styled it. His features were striking, almost severe, with high cheekbones and a strong jawline shadowed with stubble. But it was his eyes that captured my attention. Dark, intense, and carrying something ancient and exhausted in their depths. He was dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, though he wore it with the casual indifference of someone for whom expensive clothing was simply routine. There was something about his bearing, the way he occupied space, that suggested authority and danger in equal measure. Marcus turned to him with barely concealed irritation. "This is a private conversation. Mind your own business." The stranger didn't move, didn't even raise his voice. "You're harassing a woman in a public restaurant. That makes it everyone's business. I'm talking to my girlfriend." "Ex-girlfriend," I interjected, finding courage in this unexpected ally. "We broke up months ago." The stranger's eyes flicked to me for just a moment, and I saw something that might have been recognition in them. Not of me specifically, but of the situation, of fear and desperation, and the kind of trapped feeling that comes from being hunted. "You heard the lady," he said, his attention returning to Marcus. "Time to leave." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The stranger stood as well, and I realized he was taller than Marcus, broader through the shoulders. There was something predatory in the way he moved, a fluidity that suggested violence was always just a heartbeat away. Someone who's had a very long day and would prefer not to make it longer by dealing with you. His voice remained calm, almost conversational, which somehow made the underlying threat more terrifying. "Walk away. Now." For a long moment they stared at each other. The entire bistro had gone quiet, conversations dying as people sensed the tension crackling through the air. I held my breath, waiting for Marcus to do something stupid, to escalate this into violence. Then something changed in Marcus's expression. He looked at the stranger more carefully, and I saw recognition dawn in his eyes, followed quickly by something that looked uncomfortably like fear. "I know who you are," Marcus said quietly. The stranger's expression didn't change. "Then you know you should leave." Marcus took a step back, then another. His eyes found mine, and the hatred in them made me flinch. "This isn't over, Alara. Your family will pay for this, for turning you against me, for poisoning you with their lies. My family has nothing to do with this. This is about you refusing to accept that I don't want to be with you." "We'll see about that." He turned and walked toward the door, but paused before leaving, looking back at the stranger. "You're making a mistake getting involved with this." "Wouldn't be my first one." The stranger's voice was dry, almost amused. Marcus left, the door swinging shut behind him with a finality that should have brought relief. Instead, I felt my hands start to shake harder, the adrenaline crash hitting me all at once. I'd been holding myself together through pure force of will, and now that the immediate threat was gone, my body was remembering how to feel terror. The stranger sat back down at his table, picking up his phone again. For a moment, I thought that was it, that he'd go back to ignoring the world around him. But then he spoke without looking up. "Are you safe at home?" The question surprised me. I don't know. He knows where I live. He's been following me." Now he did look up, and there was something in his eyes that made my breath catch. Understanding, maybe, or recognition of a darkness he knew too intimately. How long has this been going on? 3 months since I left him. But he started showing up places about 6 weeks ago. Messages, photos. He's been escalating. The stranger was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming against his phone in a rhythm that suggested he was thinking through options, making calculations I couldn't begin to understand. Have you filed a police report? 3 of them. They say they can't do anything until he actually does something violent. Apparently, stalking and threatening messages aren't enough. I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already knew about how the world worked. The system is designed to react, not prevent. By the time they can help, it's usually too late. There was something chilling in how matter-of-factly he said that, like he was speaking from experience rather than speculation. I'm Stellan, by the way. Stellan Kincaid. He extended his hand across the gap between our tables. I shook it, noting the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. Ilara Vance. Thank you for what you did. Marcus. He's not usually that easy to intimidate. A ghost of a smile crossed Stellan's face. I have that effect on people sometimes. Occupational hazard. What do you do? The smile disappeared. Nothing legal enough to discuss in polite company. He said it so casually that for a moment I thought he was joking. But his eyes remained serious, almost challenging, waiting to see how I'd react to that confession. I should have been alarmed. Should have thanked him and left, put distance between myself and whatever darkness he represented. Instead, I found myself curious, because despite the implicit threat in his words, despite the way Marcus had backed down so quickly upon recognizing him, Stellan Kincaid had just done more to protect me than the entire Chicago Police Department. Are you going to tell me what that means? I asked. He studied me for a long moment, his dark eyes searching my face for something. Not tonight, but I am going to make sure you get home safely, and I'm going to give you a number to call if Marcus bothers you again. Why would you do that? You don't know me. No, he agreed, but I know men like him, and I know what happens when they're allowed to continue unchecked. He paused, then added quietly, consider it a public service. There was a story behind those words, layers of meaning I couldn't begin to unpack. But sitting there in that bistro, with rain still hammering against the windows and the taste of fear still metallic in my mouth, I made a decision that would change everything. Okay, I said. I'll accept your help. Stellan Kincaid nodded once, pulled out his phone, and made a call. I couldn't hear what he said, but something in his tone suggested he was giving orders that would be followed without question. I didn't know it then, but I'd just stepped into a world where the rules I'd always lived by no longer applied, where protection came with a price I couldn't yet imagine, and safety meant accepting darkness as my guardian. My salmon arrived, but I'd lost whatever small appetite I'd had. Across from me, Stellan returned to staring at his phone, looking like a man carrying the weight of too many secrets, too many sins. And somehow, impossibly, I felt safer than I had in months. Stellan insisted on following me home in his car, a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. I drove my modest Honda with one eye on the rearview mirror, watching his headlights trail behind me through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago. My apartment building was in Lincoln Park, a converted warehouse that had been transformed into trendy loft spaces. It was supposed to be secure, with a key fob entry system and cameras in the lobby. Those securities had felt reassuring when I'd signed the lease. Now they just felt like expensive theater, props that created an illusion of safety while providing none of its substance. Stellan parked behind me on the street, emerging from his car with the same fluid grace I'd noticed at the bistro. The rain had softened to a drizzle, misting the streetlights into halos of amber and white. He walked over to my driver's side window, and I rolled it down. "Which apartment?" he asked. "4th floor, 4C. He nodded, his eyes scanning the building's exterior, the nearby cars, the shadowed doorways. It was the kind of automatic threat assessment I associated with soldiers or bodyguards, people trained to see danger in everything. "I'll walk you up." "That's not necessary. I'll be fine from here." His expression suggested he disagreed, but was too polite to argue. Humor me. It's been that kind of day. I couldn't argue with that, so I got out of my car and led him to the building's entrance. My hands were still shaking slightly as I fumbled with my key fob, and I was acutely aware of Stellan standing just behind me, a solid presence that somehow managed to be both comforting and unsettling. The lobby was empty, our footsteps echoing off the polished concrete floors. We took the elevator in silence, rising through the building while bad jazz played from hidden speakers. Stellan stood in the corner, hands in his pockets, still maintaining that careful surveillance of our surroundings. "You do this often?" I asked. "Rescue strange women from their ex-boyfriends?" "Not usually, no." A hint of something that might have been amusement touched his features. "Most of my interventions are significantly less heroic." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not generally cast in the role of white knight." We reached my floor, and I led him down the hallway to my door. Everything looked normal. No signs of forced entry, no ominous messages taped to my door. Just my quiet apartment waiting for me like it had every other night. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, flipping on the lights. My space was modest but comfortable, decorated with plants I somehow managed to keep alive and artwork from local street markets. Books lined makeshift shelves, and photographs of my family clustered on every available surface. It was mine, a sanctuary I'd built after leaving Marcus. Except it didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a cage with invisible bars. Stellan remained in the doorway, not crossing the threshold without invitation. His eyes traveled over my apartment with that same assessing quality, cataloging exits and vulnerabilities. "You live alone?" "Yes." "Security system?" "Just the building's cameras and key fob entry." He frowned slightly. "Not enough." "It's what I can afford on an occupational therapist's salary." Stellan pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then looked up at me. "I'm having someone come by tomorrow to install additional security. Camera for your door, better locks, panic button connected directly to a private security firm." "I can't afford that." "You're not paying for it." I crossed my arms, suddenly defensive. "I don't accept expensive gifts from strangers, especially strangers who do illegal things for a living." That ghost of a smile returned. "It's not a gift. Call it an investment in my peace of mind. I don't like unfinished business. And Marcus struck me as very unfinished business." "Why do you care? You don't know me." Stellan was quiet for a moment, his expression shifting into something more complex, more vulnerable. When he spoke, his voice was softer, tinged with something that sounded like regret. "Because I know what it's like to be trapped in a situation you can't escape. And because I have the resources to help, which means I have the responsibility to use them." There was a story there, buried beneath the surface of those words. But before I could ask about it, Stellan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something dark crossed his features. "I need to go. Lock your door. Don't answer if anyone knocks unless you're expecting them." He pulled a card from his wallet, placing it on the small table by my door. "That's my direct number. Call me if Marcus contacts you again, or if anything feels wrong." I picked up the card. Heavy stock, minimal design. Just a phone number embossed in silver against black. No name, no title. Nothing to indicate what Stellan Kincaid actually did for a living. "What happens if I call?" I asked. "I handle it." "How?" His eyes met mine, and I saw something ancient and weary in their depths. "However it needs to be handled." Then he was gone, leaving me alone in my apartment with too many questions and a business card that felt like a grenade with the pin half pulled. I locked the door, checked it twice, then collapsed onto my couch. My phone buzzed, and I nearly jumped out of my skin before realizing it was just a text from Sienna. "How was dinner? Did you survive being around humans?" I stared at the message, trying to figure out how to explain what had just happened. That my ex-boyfriend had confronted me at the bistro. That a mysterious stranger who definitely operated outside the law had intervened. That I now had a direct line to someone who could handle my problems through unspecified and probably terrifying means. Instead, I just typed back, "Eventful. Tell you tomorrow." Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, watching shadows move across my ceiling, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building settling. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Cameras and security will be installed tomorrow at 10 a.m. Team will identify themselves as being from Kincaid Security. SK." I should have been annoyed at the presumption, at the way he'd just decided to involve himself in my life without asking. Instead, I felt something uncomfortably close to relief. The next morning arrived with watery sunlight filtering through my curtains. I'd managed maybe 3 hours of sleep, my dreams filled with Marcus's face and Stellan's dark, knowing eyes. At exactly 10 a.m., my doorbell rang. I checked the newly installed peephole and saw 2 men in professional uniforms with Kincaid Security embroidered on their shirts. They were efficient and polite, installing a sophisticated camera system, replacing my locks with something that looked like it belonged on a bank vault, and setting up a panic button disguised as a smoke detector. The whole process took less than 2 hours, and when they left, my modest apartment felt more secure than Fort Knox. I was making coffee when my phone rang. Stellan's number. "The system is active," he said without preamble. "You'll receive an alert on your phone if anyone approaches your door. The panic button connects directly to a response team that's less than 3 minutes away." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. "This is incredibly generous. It's necessary. Marcus isn't going to give up easily." A chill ran down my spine. "How do you know?" "Because I've known men like him. They don't see their victims as people, just possessions they've temporarily misplaced." He paused. "Has he contacted you since last night?" "No. It's been quiet." "It won't stay that way. Men like Marcus escalate when they feel they're losing control." His certainty was unnerving. "You sound like you have experience with this." "Too much." There was a weight in those words, years of accumulated darkness. "Ilara, I need to be honest with you about who I am, about what I do." My heart started beating faster. "Okay." "My family runs one of the largest criminal syndicates in Chicago. We've been in this business for 3 generations. Gambling, money laundering, protection rackets, and some activities I won't detail over the phone." I sat down heavily on my couch, coffee forgotten. "You're telling me you're in the Mafia." That's a dramatic way of putting it, but essentially, yes. My father built an empire on violence and fear, and when he died 2 years ago, that empire became my responsibility. "And you're telling me this why?" "Because I don't operate by deception. If you're going to accept my help, you deserve to know what that help represents. And because Marcus made a threat last night that I can't ignore." My mouth went dry. "What threat?" "He said your family would pay for this. That's not hyperbole. Men like him, when they feel cornered, they expand their targets. Parents, siblings, anyone connected to the object of their obsession." I thought of my parents, living in their quiet suburb 45 minutes outside the city. My younger sister Grace, a grad student at Northwestern. The idea of Marcus targeting them made me feel physically ill. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that I can make sure Marcus never bothers you or your family again. Permanently." The word hung between us, heavy with implication. "You're talking about killing him." "I'm talking about neutralizing a threat before it escalates into something tragic. You've seen how the legal system handles stalkers. They wait until someone's dead before they act. I don't have that luxury of patience. I should have been horrified, should have hung up, blocked his number, gone to the police with everything he'd just confessed. Instead, I found myself asking, what would it cost? There's always a price. Not money, Stellan said. I don't need your money. But I would need you to trust me, to accept that what I'm going to do might frighten you, might challenge everything you believe about right and wrong. And I'd need you to understand that once this starts, there's no going back. I thought about Marcus's face last night, the possessive rage in his eyes. I thought about my parents, my sister, all the people I loved who could become targets of his escalating obsession. I thought about 3 months of living in fear, of checking over my shoulder, of treating every unknown number like a threat. What happens if I say yes? Marcus disappears from your life. You'll never hear from him again, never have to worry about him showing up at your work or following you home. Your family stays safe. And the cost to you? A dry laugh came through the phone. My soul's already mortgaged to darker powers than this, Alara. One more sin on the ledger barely registers anymore. There was such exhaustion in his voice, such profound weariness with the weight of his own existence. It made me wonder what kind of life had created Stellan Kincaid, what circumstances had forged a man who spoke of murder like it was just another item on a to-do list. I need time to think about this. You have 24 hours. After that, Marcus's behavior is likely to escalate, and my ability to control the situation diminishes. The call ended, leaving me alone with an impossible choice. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions of my job at the Pediatric Rehabilitation Center, while my mind spun through impossible scenarios. Between sessions with my young patients, I researched Stellan Kincaid. The internet offered surprisingly little. A few mentions in business journals about legitimate enterprises, real estate holdings, a charitable foundation bearing his family name. Nothing about criminal activities. Nothing to confirm the confession he'd made so casually over the phone. Either he was lying, or his family was exceptionally good at burying their secrets. I called Sienna during my lunch break and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which was uncharacteristic enough that I knew she understood the gravity of the situation. So, you're telling me you've been adopted by the Mafia? She said when I finished. That's a dramatic way of putting it. Alara, he literally confessed to running a criminal organization and offered to murder your ex-boyfriend. How is that dramatic? Fair point. Sienna was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to call the police, turn Stellan in, handle this through legitimate channels. But those channels haven't worked. I've filed reports, gotten a restraining order Marcus ignores, changed my entire life trying to stay safe, and I'm still terrified every single day. And the other part of you? I closed my eyes, shame burning through me. The other part of me wants to say yes, wants to let Stellan make this problem disappear so I can finally stop being afraid. That's not shameful, Sienna said gently. That's human. You've been living in survival mode for months. It makes sense that you'd be tempted by an easy solution. Except it's not easy. It's murder. It's self-defense by proxy. Sienna's voice was firm. Marcus has made it clear he's a threat. The system has made it clear they won't protect you until after he's hurt you. What Stellan's offering is preemptive protection. You're defending the mob? I'm defending you. And if the mob is offering better protection than the Chicago Police Department, maybe we need to reconsider our definitions of good and evil. After work, I drove to my parents' house. They lived in Oak Park, in a charming craftsman bungalow they'd purchased before I was born. My mother met me at the door with her usual warmth, immediately sensing something was wrong. Alara, sweetheart, what is it? I told them about Marcus's escalation, about the confrontation at the bistro. I left out the part about Stellan Kincaid and his offered solution, not ready to explain that particular moral complexity to my parents. My father's face darkened as I spoke, his hands clenching into fists. This has gone on long enough. I'm calling my lawyer tomorrow. We're getting an emergency restraining order with real teeth. Dad, I already have a restraining order. Marcus doesn't care. Then we make him care. We pursue criminal charges for stalking, harassment, anything that will put him behind bars. My mother put her hand on his arm, calming him with the ease of 30 years of marriage. Henry, let's think about this rationally. Legal processes take time, and in the meantime, Ilara isn't safe. What are you suggesting? She looked at me with those perceptive eyes that had always seen more than I wanted to reveal. I'm suggesting our daughter might be considering options that exist outside the legal system. I stared at her, stunned. How did you... I'm your mother. I know when you're wrestling with a difficult decision. And I know that look. It's the same expression you had when you were 7 and had to decide whether to tell your teacher that your best friend was stealing lunch money. This is slightly more serious than elementary school theft. The principle is the same. You're trying to decide between what's technically right and what's practically necessary. She sat down across from me, taking my hands in hers. Tell me about this man who helped you at the bistro. So I did. I told them about Stellan Kincaid, about his casual confession of criminal enterprise, about the security system he'd installed and the protection he'd offered. My father listened with increasing alarm, but my mother remained calm, thoughtful. And you trust him? She asked when I finished. I don't know him well enough to trust him, but yes, I believe he's sincere about protecting me. Why would he do that? What does he get out of helping you? It was a good question, one I'd been asking myself. I don't think he gets anything. I think he's trying to balance some internal ledger to do something good in the midst of all the terrible things his life requires. My father stood abruptly, pacing across the living room. This is insane. You're talking about accepting help from a criminal, getting involved with the mafia. I'm talking about staying alive, I countered. Marcus isn't going to stop. He's escalating. He threatened you and Mom, threatened Grace. What am I supposed to do? Wait for him to hurt one of you before the police finally decide to act? There has to be another way. Name it, Dad. Give me a legitimate option that actually keeps us all safe. He couldn't, and the helplessness on his face broke my heart. My father was a good man, a high school principal who believed in rules and systems and the basic goodness of humanity. This situation existed outside his worldview, in a space where darkness operated, and good people sometimes had to make terrible choices. My mother stood, moving to stand beside my father. Ilara, whatever you decide, we support you. If you choose to accept this man's help, we understand. If you choose to continue fighting through legal channels, we'll stand beside you. But please, be careful. Men who live in darkness, even when they mean well, they carry shadows that can swallow everything around them. I left their house more confused than when I'd arrived. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A text from an unknown number. Your sister is very pretty. Would be a shame if something happened to her. Below the message was a photo of Grace leaving her apartment building at Northwestern, taken from across the street. My hands started shaking so badly I could barely dial Stellan's number. He answered on the first ring. Ilara. He sent me a picture of my sister. My voice was barely controlled panic. He's threatening Grace. A pause. Send me the message. I'll have someone watching her within the hour. I'm saying yes to everything, to your help, your protection, whatever it takes. Just keep my family safe. Are you certain? Once this starts? I'm certain. Do whatever you need to do. Another pause, longer this time. When Stellan spoke again, his voice was gentle, almost sad. I'll handle it. But Ilara, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to do It will change how you see me. It might change how you see yourself. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Grace, bright and brilliant, with her whole life ahead of her. I thought about my parents, who'd given me everything they could. I thought about all the people Marcus might hurt in his obsessive quest to reclaim me as his possession. Do it, I said. Do whatever it takes. Okay. I'm sending protection to your sister now. And Alara, stay home tonight. Don't answer your door for anyone except me. The call ended. I sat in my car outside my parents' house, feeling like I'd just crossed a threshold I could never uncross. I'd made a deal with the devil in an expensive suit, trading my moral certainty for the promise of safety. My phone rang again. Stellan. Your sister is secure. I have 2 of my best people watching her building. Marcus won't get within 100 yards. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm coming to your apartment in 2 hours. We need to discuss what happens next. What does happen next? You learn to live with the choices we make to protect the people we love. He arrived exactly 2 hours later, dressed in dark jeans and a black sweater that made him look more dangerous than any suit could. I buzzed him up, my heart racing as I listened to his footsteps approaching down the hallway. When I opened the door, Stellan's eyes met mine with an intensity that made me take a step back. It's done, he said quietly. Marcus won't bother you again. What did you do? I had a conversation with him, made it very clear that any further contact with you or your family would have severe consequences. What kind of consequences? Stellan walked into my apartment, moving to the window that overlooked the street below. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, shoulders tense with something that looked like exhaustion. The kind that men like Marcus understand. I showed him evidence of every illegal thing he's ever done. Financial fraud, insider trading, tax evasion. Enough to send him to prison for 20 years. And I made it clear that this information would be delivered to the FBI the moment you or anyone connected to you experienced even a hint of harassment. You're blackmailing him? I'm leveraging his fear of consequences. It's cleaner than the alternative. I sat down heavily on my couch, relief and disappointment warring inside me. I thought you were going to kill him. Would you have preferred that? No. God, no. But you said... I said I would handle it. I didn't specify how. Despite what you might think, Alara, I don't default to violence unless absolutely necessary. Marcus is a coward who folds when confronted with real power. Killing him would have been wasteful. I looked at him,
really looked at him, trying to understand this man who'd inserted himself into my life like a dark guardian angel. Why are you helping me? Stellan turned from the window, his expression unreadable. Because 5 years ago, I failed to help someone in a similar situation, and she died because of my inaction. The confession hung between us, raw and painful. What happened? I asked softly. She was the sister of one of my associates, being stalked by an ex-boyfriend who escalated to violence. She asked for help, and I told her to go to the police, to handle it through legitimate channels. I wanted to believe the system would protect her. His voice was flat, emotionless, but I could hear the pain underneath. He broke into her apartment 3 days later. She survived the attack, but barely. She's been in a psychiatric facility ever since, too traumatized to function in the outside world. That wasn't your fault. It was absolutely my fault. I had the power to intervene, to make him disappear, or at least terrify him into backing off. But I was trying to be better, to operate within the law. My morality cost her everything. So now you overcompensate by helping women you don't know. A bitter smile touched his lips. I do what I should have done then. I use the darkness I carry for something that approximates good. I stood, crossing the distance between us. Up close,
I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of too many compromises and moral calculations. "Thank you," I said, "for what you did tonight, for keeping my family safe. You might not thank me when you understand the full cost." "What cost?" "Marcus knows who threatened him. That means he knows about me, about my family's business. And in my world, knowledge is currency. He could use what he knows to cause problems." A chill ran through me. "You're saying I've put you in danger?" "I'm saying there are consequences to involvement, to caring about outcomes, rather than maintaining careful distance." He reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek with unexpected gentleness. "But some consequences are worth accepting." The touch sent electricity through me, awareness sparking in the space between us. Stellan must have felt it too, because he stepped back quickly, putting professional distance between us again. "I should go. You're safe now. Marcus won't contact you again. And if he's stupid enough to try, I'll know immediately." "How?" "Let's just say I'm having his communications monitored. Phone, email, everything. Any mention of you or your family will trigger an alert." He moved toward the door, and I followed, not ready for him to leave despite knowing he should. At the threshold, he paused. "Alara, there's something else you should know. My family's business, it's not just what I told you. There are parts of it that are darker, more violent than I let on. If you continue accepting my help, you'll eventually see that darkness, and you might not like what you find." "Are you warning me off?" "I'm giving you fair notice. I'm not a good man. I've done terrible things, and I'll likely do more before my life is over. You're a therapist who helps children. Your world is light and hope and healing. Mine is the opposite of all that. Maybe that's why we balance each other out." Stellan looked at me for a long moment, something vulnerable flickering across his features before his usual control reasserted itself. "Get some sleep," he said finally. "Tomorrow, life goes back to normal." But as he walked away, I knew normal was no longer an option. I'd glimpsed something in Stellan Kincaid that called to parts of myself I didn't fully understand. And despite his warnings, despite my better judgment, I wanted to understand more. For 3 weeks, life was blessedly quiet. Marcus disappeared from my daily existence as completely as if he'd never existed. No texts, no surprise appearances, no photos taken from shadowed doorways. Grace continued her graduate studies unmolested. My parents relaxed. I started sleeping through the night again. Stellan checked in periodically with brief texts. Marcus still quiet. "Your sister's safe. Everything clear. Nothing personal. Nothing that suggested our relationship was anything beyond transactional." I told myself I was relieved by the professional distance. I was lying. Something had shifted during that conversation in my apartment. I found myself thinking about him at odd moments. The exhaustion in his eyes when he talked about his past. The careful way he'd touched my cheek. The burden he carried of trying to be good while operating in darkness. My curiosity became obsession. I researched the Kincaid family more thoroughly, digging through newspaper archives and public records. What I found painted a picture of 3 generations of carefully maintained power. Stellan's grandfather had immigrated from Eastern Europe in the 50s, building an empire through protection rackets and gambling. His father had expanded and legitimized, creating shell companies and legitimate businesses to launder criminal proceeds. But it was Stellan himself who fascinated me most. He'd attended Harvard, graduated with honors in business administration. There were photos of him from that era, younger and less burdened, smiling at campus events with the easy confidence of someone who didn't yet understand the weight of his inheritance. Then his father died suddenly 2 years ago, a heart attack at 58. Stellan had inherited everything, a kingdom built on violence and fear. The few photos of him from after that point showed the transformation, the lightness gone, replaced by the weary intensity I recognized. I was deep in research on a Saturday afternoon when my doorbell rang. The security camera Stellan had installed showed him standing in my hallway, dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket. My heart did something complicated and inconvenient. I buzzed him in, taking a moment to check my reflection. I was wearing old yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, my hair in a messy bun. Not exactly the image I wanted to project, but too late to change now. "Hey," I said, opening the door. "Is everything okay?" "Fine, just in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in personally." His eyes traveled over my apartment, noting the books and research materials spread across my coffee table. "Am I interrupting?" "No, I was just researching." He walked over to the table, his expression shifting as he saw printouts about his family. "Investigating your dark guardian angel?" "Trying to understand who I've allied myself with." Stellan picked up one of the articles, a piece from the Tribune about his father's business dealings. "And what have you concluded?" "That you inherited an empire you never wanted. That you're trying to dismantle it from the inside while still maintaining enough control to protect the people who depend on you. That you're exhausted from playing a role you despise." He set the article down, surprise flickering across his features. "That's remarkably perceptive for someone who's never lived in this world. I'm trained to read people, to understand trauma and coping mechanisms. You wear yours like armor. And what trauma am I coping with?" I gestured to the couch, and after a moment's hesitation, Stellan sat. I took the chair across from him, studying him the way I would a patient. "You lost your father 2 years ago, suddenly and without warning. You inherited responsibilities you weren't prepared for, an organization built on principles you fundamentally disagree with. But you can't just walk away because too many people depend on the structure your family created. Employees, associates, people who've built their lives around your empire. So you're trapped between your morality and your loyalty, trying to find a way to be good in a context that defines goodness as weakness." Stellan was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You should have been a psychologist instead of an occupational therapist," he said finally. "I considered it, decided I preferred working with kids, less complicated. Smart choice. Adults are disasters." I laughed, and some of the tension broke. Stellan relaxed slightly, though he still maintained that careful watchfulness that never completely left him. "So what brings you here, really?" I asked. "I don't believe you were just in the neighborhood." "I have a proposition for you. And before you panic, not that kind of proposition." "I'm listening." "My family runs a charity, the Kincaid Foundation. We fund after-school programs, scholarship initiatives, community health clinics. All legitimate, all designed to give back to the neighborhoods we've historically exploited. We're expanding our therapeutic services for children with trauma backgrounds, and I need someone to consult on the program design." I blinked, surprised. "You want to hire me?" "I want your expertise. You work with kids recovering from physical trauma. Many of the children we serve are dealing with emotional trauma, violence in their homes, gang exposure. I think your perspective could be valuable." "And this has nothing to do with what happened with Marcus?" "It has everything to do with that. I saw how you handled yourself under pressure, how you protected your family while managing your own fear. That kind of strength under duress translates well to working with traumatized populations. It was a compelling offer, the kind of work that could make a real difference. But accepting would mean deeper involvement with Stellan's world, blurring the already complicated lines between us. What would this entail? Meeting with our program directors, reviewing current protocols, making recommendations for therapeutic interventions, maybe 10 hours a week to start. Paid consultant rate, naturally. Naturally. I studied him, trying to understand his motivations. "Why is this important to you?" Stellan stood, moving to my window with that restless energy that seemed to drive him. Because the Kincaid Empire was built by exploiting vulnerable communities. My grandfather understood that poverty and desperation create opportunities for people like us. We offered protection, loans, opportunities that legitimate systems denied. And in return, we took. We took money, loyalty, pieces of people's souls. And you want to give something back. I want to stop the cycle. To give kids alternatives so they don't grow up thinking organized crime is their only option. To provide therapeutic support so trauma doesn't calcify into the kind of violence that perpetuates everything. He turned to face me. I can't undo what my family's done, but maybe I can prevent the next generation from following the same path. The passion in his voice was real, raw. This wasn't about assuaging guilt or playing white knight. This was about genuine belief that he could make a difference despite the darkness he carried. Okay, I said, I'll do it. Just like that? Just like that. With 2 conditions. 1, I need complete autonomy in my recommendations. I won't compromise therapeutic best practices for optics or budget constraints. And 2, you tell me the truth about the woman you failed to help. The whole truth, not the edited version. Stellan's expression closed off. That's a steep price. Those are my terms. He was quiet for so long, I thought he'd refuse. Then he moved back to the couch, sitting down with the careful deliberation of someone about to expose a wound they usually kept bandaged. Her name was Natasha Volkov. She was the younger sister of one of my enforcers, a man named Dmitri, who'd worked for my father since they were both teenagers. Natasha was 22, brilliant, studying architecture at Illinois Tech. She'd been dating a guy named Carson Webb, someone from a good family, someone who seemed safe. Stellan's hands clenched into fists, knuckles whitening. Carson turned out to be anything but safe. He was controlling, possessive, violent when he didn't get his way. Natasha broke up with him, and he started stalking her, following her to classes, showing up at her apartment, sending dozens of messages a day. Dmitri asked me to intervene, to use my resources to make Carson back off. And you said no? I said to go through proper channels. I was trying to separate myself from the more violent aspects of the family business. I'd just taken over after my father's death, and I was determined to be different. To use legal means rather than defaulting to intimidation and violence. What happened? Dmitri filed a police report, got a restraining order, did everything by the book. And 3 days later, Carson broke into Natasha's apartment with a knife. He stabbed her 17 times. She survived, technically, but the psychological damage was catastrophic. She hasn't spoken since the attack, hasn't left the psychiatric facility where she's been for the past 5 years. Horror washed through me. That's not your fault. You can't blame yourself for someone else's violence. I had the power to prevent it. One phone call, one visit to Carson explaining what would happen if he continued, and Natasha would be finishing her architecture degree instead of staring at walls in a psychiatric ward. His eyes met mine, filled with a guilt that had clearly been eating at him for years. I chose morality over effectiveness, and Natasha paid the price. So now you err on the side of intervention. Now I use every tool at my disposal to protect people who need protecting, even if those tools are dark, even if using them damns me further. I understood then, the security system, the protection for my family, the offer to eliminate Marcus. They were all attempts to rewrite that failure, to save me the way he couldn't save Natasha. You can't save everyone, Stellan. No, but I can save the ones right in front of me, starting with you. The intensity in his gaze made my pulse quicken. We were crossing into dangerous territory, moving beyond the transactional relationship we'd maintained. I should go, Stellan said abruptly, standing. I'll have my assistant send over the foundation materials for you to review. Stay. The word escaped before I could stop it. For dinner, I mean. It's the least I can do after you've done so much for me. He hesitated, clearly warring with himself. That's not a good idea. Why not? Because I'm already too invested in your well-being. Because spending more time together will only complicate something that should remain simple. Maybe I want it complicated. Stellan closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, there was something vulnerable there. Something that made my heart ache. Alara, you need to understand what you'd be getting involved with. I'm not exaggerating when I say I've done terrible things. I've hurt people, killed people when necessary. I carry debts I can never repay and sins that will follow me to my grave. Everyone has darkness, not like mine. My darkness has body counts attached to it. The confession should have terrified me, should have sent me running in the opposite direction. Instead, I found myself standing, crossing to where he stood, looking up into his haunted eyes. I'm not afraid of your darkness. I'm afraid of living a half-life, always playing it safe, never taking risks. I'm not a risk. I'm a guarantee of complications you can't imagine. Then complicate me. For a moment, I thought he'd leave anyway. Then his hand came up, cupping my face with a gentleness that contradicted everything he'd just confessed. You're going to regret this, he murmured. Probably, but I'd regret not trying more. Stellan's thumb brushed across my cheekbone, his expression shifting into something tender and tormented all at once. Then he leaned down and kissed me. It was gentle at first, almost questioning. But when I responded, threading my fingers through his hair, the kiss deepened into something that felt like falling and flying simultaneously. He tasted like whiskey and secrets, and I wanted to explore every shadow he carried. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Stellan rested his forehead against mine. This is a mistake, he said. Then let's make it together. And standing there in my small apartment with Chicago spreading out below us in a tapestry of lights and shadows, I chose to fall into the darkness with him. Consequences be damned. Stellan stayed for dinner. We ordered takeout, Thai food from a place down the street, and talked for hours. He told me about growing up in his family, the constant pressure to be strong, ruthless, worthy of the empire he'd inherit. I told him about my work with kids, the small victories that made all the frustration worthwhile. It felt normal, like a regular date between two regular people, rather than a therapist and a mob boss navigating impossible complications. When he finally left, close to midnight, he kissed me at the door with a tenderness that made my heart ache. I'll call you tomorrow, he promised. But he didn't. Days passed with no word from Stellan. I told myself he was busy, that running a criminal empire probably consumed most of his time. But doubt crept in. Had he regretted that kiss? Decided I was too much of a liability? I focused on work, throwing myself into sessions with my young patients. But even their progress couldn't fully distract me from the gnawing worry that I'd misread everything. Then, exactly 1 week after our dinner, I received a package. A messenger delivered it to my apartment, a flat box wrapped in expensive paper. Inside was a tablet loaded with materials about the Kincaid Foundation's youth programs. And a note, in elegant handwriting. I apologize for the silence. Business complications required my full attention. Review these materials, then call me. We have work to do. SK. I called immediately. I'm sorry, Stellan said when he answered. I should have reached out sooner. What happened? One of my associates decided to expand his territory without authorization. I had to manage the situation before it escalated into a war with a rival organization. The casual way he said it sent chills through me. And did you? Manage it? Yes, though it required methods I'm not proud of. I wanted to ask what methods, what exactly he'd done. But some part of me wasn't ready for those details, for the full reality of what his life entailed. Are you okay? I asked instead. A pause. That's a complicated question. Stellan, I need to see you. Not for the foundation work. I need to see you. The vulnerability in his voice undid me. I'm home. Come over. He arrived 30 minutes later, looking like he hadn't slept in days. There was blood on his collar, carefully concealed by his jacket, but visible when he moved a certain way. You're hurt, I said, reaching for him. It's not mine. He caught my hand, holding it gently. Ilara, I told you I've done terrible things. This week, I did more. And I need you to decide if that's something you can live with. What did you do? I made an example of someone who threatened the stability of my organization. I did it in a way that ensured no one else would make the same mistake. It was brutal and necessary, and entirely unforgivable. I should have stepped back, put distance between us. Instead, I pulled him inside, led him to my bathroom, and began cleaning the blood from his collar with careful hands. Tell me about it, I said, not the details, just how you feel. Stellan leaned against the sink, watching me work. Exhausted, disgusted with myself, but also relieved that the threat's neutralized and my people are safe. You're trying to protect them. I'm perpetuating a cycle of violence that should have ended generations ago. I set aside the blood-stained cloth, looking up at him. You're doing the best you can in an impossible situation. That doesn't make you a monster, doesn't it? Good people don't solve problems with violence. Good people also don't inherit criminal empires at 33. You're working with the reality you have, not the one you wish existed. Something in his expression cracked, vulnerability flooding through. How are you not terrified of me? Because I see what you don't. You're so focused on your darkness that you can't see the light trying to break through. The foundation work, the protection you offered me, even the guilt you carry, they all point to someone trying desperately to be better than his circumstances allow. Stellan pulled me close, burying his face in my hair. You're going to save me or destroy me. I haven't figured out which yet. Maybe both. We stood like that for a long time, holding each other in my small bathroom while the weight of his world pressed down around us. Over the following weeks, I learned to navigate Stellan's complicated existence. I consulted for the foundation, developing therapeutic protocols that could genuinely help traumatized kids. The work was fulfilling, meaningful, everything I'd hoped it would be. But I also learned about the other side of his life. The late-night calls that sent him rushing out at odd hours, the bruised knuckles and tired eyes, the careful way he never mentioned specifics about his work, protecting me from details I wasn't ready to confront. We fell into a rhythm. Dinners when his schedule allowed. Long conversations that stretched into early morning. Stolen moments of normalcy in a life defined by darkness. But the secrets were always there, lurking beneath the surface. One night, 3 months after we'd started seeing each other, Stellan showed up at my apartment looking more troubled than I'd ever seen him. He paced my living room like a caged animal, unable to settle. What's wrong? I asked. I need to tell you something. About my past. About things I've done. Dread pooled in my stomach. Okay. He sat down heavily on my couch, his hands clasped between his knees. 5 years ago, before my father died, there was a situation. A rival organization was moving in on our territory, trying to take over our protection rackets. They targeted one of our operations, killed 3 of our associates. What did you do? I led the retaliation. My father wanted to send a message, to make it clear that challenges to the Kincaid family would be met with overwhelming force. So I coordinated an attack on their headquarters. 7 people died that night. My breath caught. You killed them? Not personally. But I planned it, organized it, gave the orders. Their blood is on my hands as surely as if I'd pulled the trigger myself. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. This wasn't abstract violence. This was specific, calculated murder. Were any of them innocent? Civilians? No. They were all members of the organization. But that doesn't absolve me. I took 7 lives to send a message about power and control. Why are you telling me this now? Stellan looked up, his eyes filled with something that looked like desperation. Because you're falling for someone you don't fully know. Because I can't keep letting you build a version of me in your head that's better than the reality. And because I'd rather you walk away now than stay and hate me later when you learn the full truth. I stood, needing to move, to process. Everything I thought I understood about Stellan was shifting, revealing darker layers beneath. Do you regret it? I asked finally. Those deaths? Every single day. But I'd probably do the same thing again if faced with the same situation, because in my world, mercy is interpreted as weakness. That's a terrible way to live. It's the only way I know. I turned to face him, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as a dark guardian angel or a man trying to be better, but as someone genuinely trapped, caught between his moral compass and the brutal pragmatism his position required. I need time, I said, to think about this, about us. I understand. Stellan stood, moving toward the door. For what it's worth, Alara, you've been the best thing in my life in a very long time. Whatever you decide, that won't change. After he left, I sat in the darkness of my apartment, trying to reconcile the gentle man who kissed me tenderly with the one who'd coordinated the deaths of 7 people. I called Sienna, desperate for perspective. He killed people, I said without preamble when she answered. 7 of them. He planned it and ordered it, and he'd do it again. Are you surprised? Yes, no, I don't know. I knew abstractly that he was involved in violence, but this is specific. This is real. Alara, you fell for a mob boss. What did you think that meant? I thought it meant complicated business dealings and moral gray areas, not ordering hits on rival organizations. Sienna was quiet for a moment. Here's the question you need to ask yourself. Can you love someone capable of violence? Not despite their capacity for it, but with full knowledge of what they've done and might do again? I don't know. Then figure it out. Because staying with Stellan halfway, with reservations and judgment, that's not fair to either of you. I spent 3 days wrestling with the question. I thought about Natasha Volkov, about how Stellan's refusal to use violence had left her broken. I thought about Marcus, about how Stellan's intervention had given me my life back. I thought about the kids at the foundation, getting therapeutic support because Stellan was trying to give back. And I thought about the 7 people who died because Stellan had chosen power over mercy. On the 4th day, I called him. I've made a decision, I said when he answered. I'm listening. I can't promise I'll always understand your choices. I can't promise I won't struggle with the darker parts of your life, but I can promise to try. To see you completely, darkness and all, and choose to stay anyway. Silence on the other end. Then, very quietly, why? Because you're trying to be better. Because you carry the weight of your choices instead of hiding from them. Because you protected me when no one else could. And because I've fallen in love with you. Complications and all. More silence. Then, I love you too. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that. That night, Stellan came to my apartment, and we didn't talk about violence or empires or the impossible complications of our situation. We just held each other. 2 broken people finding something like wholeness in the darkness. For 3 beautiful months, we built something that almost looked like normal. Stellan slowly disentangled himself from the violent aspects of his empire, delegating to trusted associates while focusing more on the legitimate businesses and foundation work. I watched him transform, saw the exhaustion in his eyes gradually replaced with something that might have been hope. We talked about the future, about maybe leaving Chicago entirely, starting over somewhere his family name didn't carry so much weight, about building a life that didn't require constant moral compromise. It felt possible. For the first time in his life, Stellan seemed to believe he could escape the gravity of his inheritance. Then Marcus resurfaced. I was leaving work one evening when I noticed him across the street, watching. Our eyes met, and the hatred in his gaze made me freeze. He held up his phone, showing me a photo. It took a moment to process what I was seeing. It was Stellan, leaving a warehouse on the south side. The photo had been taken through a telephoto lens, capturing his face clearly as he climbed into his car. Below the image was a caption: "Tell your boyfriend the FBI will be very interested in his activities." My phone buzzed with a call from Stellan. "Get inside. Now. Lock the doors and don't leave until I get there." "Marcus is here. He just showed me. I know, I have someone watching him. He's been taking photos for weeks, building a file." Terror clawed at my throat. What is he planning? To destroy me by giving evidence to the FBI, and to use that threat to get to you. I ran back inside my building, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the lock. Stellan arrived 15 minutes later, moving through my apartment with lethal purpose, checking windows and exits. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Bad. Marcus has photos, recordings, documentation of operations that could bring down my entire organization. If that information reaches the FBI, I'm looking at 20 years minimum." "Then give him what he wants." "Me. I'll talk to him. Try to convince him." "Absolutely not." Stellan's voice was hard, brooking no argument. "You're not negotiating with him. You're not going anywhere near him." "Then what do we do?" Stellan sat down heavily, and I saw the weight of impossible decisions settling over him again. "I handle it. The way I should have from the beginning. You're going to kill him." "I'm going to neutralize a threat that endangers everyone I care about. That's not the same thing." "It's exactly the same thing." I moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at me. "If you do this, if you cross that line, there's no coming back. You'll be what everyone always assumed you were, a killer." "I'm already a killer, Ilara. 7 people, remember? This would just be adding one more name to a list that's already too long." "No, those were different. You were protecting your organization, your people. This is personal. This is revenge. This is survival. Marcus won't stop. He'll keep threatening, escalating, until someone gets hurt. Probably you. I won't allow that." I knelt in front of him, taking his hands in mine. "There has to be another way. We can leave, disappear, take whatever money you've hidden away, and start over somewhere he can't find us. Running doesn't work. Marcus has already demonstrated he's resourceful enough to track you down, and even if we escaped him, the FBI investigation would continue. My associates, my employees, people who depend on me would suffer. Then turn yourself in. Cooperate with the investigation. Maybe they'll offer leniency if you provide information about other organizations." Stellan laughed bitterly. "That's not how this world works. Cooperating would paint a target on my back. Every organization we've ever competed with would see me as vulnerable. I'd be dead within a month, and so would anyone associated with me, including you." I felt hope slipping away, replaced by the terrible understanding that we'd run out of good options. Every path forward led to darkness. "I won't let you become a monster to save me," I said desperately. "I've been a monster for years. I've just been pretending otherwise when I'm with you." He cupped my face, his thumb brushing away tears I hadn't realized were falling. "This is who I am, Ilara. Who I've always been. The only difference is now you're seeing it clearly. I don't believe that. You're better than this." "I'm really not." But I love you enough to become a monster again if it keeps you safe. He stood, gently moving me aside. Stay here. Don't answer the door for anyone. I'll have people watching the building. Stellan, please. I love you. Remember that, when you're hating me for what I'm about to do. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with my terror and the horrible certainty that everything was about to fall apart. I called Sienna, called my parents, told them all to be careful, that Marcus was escalating. Then I sat in the darkness and waited, each minute stretching into eternity. 3 hours later, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. Ms. Vance? A woman's voice, professional and cold. Yes? This is Special Agent Martinez with the FBI. I need you to come to our field office immediately. My heart stopped. Why? Marcus Holloway has provided evidence of criminal activity involving Stellan Kincaid. We understand you've been in a relationship with Mr. Kincaid. We need to ask you some questions. The world tilted. Am I being arrested? Not at this time, but your cooperation would be appreciated. I ended up at the FBI field office at midnight, sitting in an interrogation room across from Special Agent Martinez and her partner. They showed me the evidence Marcus had compiled. Photos, recordings, financial documents that painted a damning picture of Stellan's activities. We'd like your help building a case against Mr. Kincaid, Martinez said. In exchange, we can offer you immunity from any charges related to your association with him. I don't know anything about his business activities. Ms. Vance, we have evidence that you've been consulting for the Kincaid Foundation, that you've had regular contact with known associates of the Kincaid organization. Your cooperation could be crucial. I thought about Stellan, about the exhaustion in his eyes when he talked about trying to escape his inheritance. I thought about the foundation work, the genuine good he was trying to do. I want a lawyer, I said. They let me go 2 hours later, with instructions not to leave the city. I stood outside the federal building, shaking with adrenaline and fear, when a car pulled up. Not Stellan's Mercedes, a nondescript sedan with tinted windows. The back door opened, and Stellan was inside. Get in, he said. I did, and we drove in silence through Chicago's empty streets. Finally, he spoke. Marcus is gone. Gone how? Gone in a way that ensures he'll never threaten you or your family again. In a way that means the FBI's case just lost their primary witness. Horror and relief warred inside me. You killed him. I removed a threat. The distinction might matter to you, even if it doesn't to me. Where's the body? In a place where it will never be found. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Stellan pulled the car over, turning to face me in the dim light. I'm leaving Chicago, tonight. The FBI investigation will continue, but without Marcus's testimony, their case is significantly weaker. I'm going to disappear. Let my associates handle things while I establish a new identity somewhere far from here. And me? You stay. You have your life, your career, your family. I won't ask you to give that up to run with me. What if I want to? Stellan's expression was tender and heartbroken all at once. Then you'd be making a terrible mistake, because life with me means always looking over your shoulder, always wondering when the past will catch up. You deserve better. I deserve to choose, and I choose you. He kissed me then, desperate and gentle, like a man saying goodbye. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. If you come with me, there's no coming back. You'll be leaving everything behind. Your career, your family, the life you've built. Are you really willing to do that? I thought about my parents, my sister, Sienna, about the kids I worked with, the meaningful career I'd built, about everything I'd be sacrificing. Then I thought about life without Stellan, about going back to being safe and boring and half alive. Where are we going? He smiled, real warmth breaking through for the first time that terrible night. Somewhere warm. Somewhere we can be whoever we decide to be, rather than who we were born to become. Then let's go. We drove to my apartment long enough for me to pack a bag. I left a note for my parents, trying to explain without explaining too much. Then Stellan and I disappeared into the night, heading for a future that was uncertain but ours. We ended up in a small coastal town in Mexico, a place where money could buy new identities, and questions were rarely asked. Stellan liquidated hidden accounts, setting up a legitimate business importing handcrafted goods. I started volunteering at a local clinic, working with children who needed occupational therapy. It was quiet, simple, nothing like the lives we'd left behind. Some mornings, I'd wake up and wonder if I'd made the right choice. Wonder about my family, about the career I'd abandoned. Then I'd look at Stellan, sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, and know I'd chosen correctly. He'd been trying to escape his darkness his whole life. In the end, it took falling into someone else's light to find the way out. We weren't perfect. Some days, the weight of what we'd left behind pressed down on both of us. But we were free from expectations, from inherited violence, from the constant weight of impossible choices. One evening, 6 months after we'd fled Chicago, we sat on a beach watching the sunset. Stellan took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. "I keep expecting to wake up," he said, "to find out this was all a dream, and I'm still trapped in that old life. It's real. We're real. I don't deserve this. This peace, this happiness. Not after everything I've done." I turned to face him, seeing the man I loved in all his complicated reality. "Maybe that's exactly why you deserve it. Because you spent your whole life paying for sins you inherited. This is your reward for finally choosing yourself." He pulled me close, and we sat there as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight we had this: peace, safety, love. Sometimes redemption doesn't look like grand gestures or dramatic transformation. Sometimes it looks like two broken people finding each other in the darkness and choosing to build something new in the light. We'd left our old lives behind, burned bridges we could never rebuild. But in their ashes, we'd found something rare and precious. A second chance, a fresh start, a future written by our own hands rather than inherited from ghosts. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.